Hey, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Table, where we have conversations around the table, giving you maybe some thoughts and ideas to go beyond it and have them with your team. And back by popular demand is Pastor Brent Williams. And we got a lot of feedback, good feedback from our last conversation together. And so we want to do that again today about finding success in spiritual growth. And the very title gives me a little bit of a rash, but hopefully we'll be able to break that down and get rid of that kind of nuance or those ideas that people have when they hear spiritual growth. And so anyway, over the summer, we're going to be coming to you at least once a month, maybe twice a month, but probably not as often because I know people have vacations and whatnot, but be following us, hit like, hit share if it encourages you and helps somebody else. And so, Brent, thanks for joining me again today.
Yeah.
And let's kind of jump into some of this a little bit if we can. And
well, what you said a while ago, it gives you a rash. I think we might kind of both hit in that area because when you throw spiritual growth in to anything other than church, it always carries that dynamic with it in people's heads.
Right.
But it's a huge component just in not the development of an organization. There's a lot of great organizations led by people who aren't believers.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
But don't you think when you talk about bringing spiritual growth into the dynamic of a leader or an organization, it moves the conversation to more than what can somebody leave on the planet or improve in individuals while they're here, but it brings on an eternal dynamic.
Yeah, I think, and I goofed around a little bit with the idea earlier about what gives me a rash. It's because from my entire ministry since I've started, I've really pushed against the idea of compartmentalized Christianity.
Yeah.
I don't think that you can just simply be a believer at church and not a believer everywhere you go. I don't think spirituality stops when you walk out the exit of a door. Spirituality should be impact everything that we do, and everything that we do does have an eternal ramifications. And so, when we look at a person, we look at an individual, we look at body, soul, and spirit. I remember back in the early 90s, late 80s, I read a book by Watchman Nee called The Spiritual Man, where he kind of flipped that whole idea on its head. And he says, we view body, soul, and spirit because we view humanity from a fallen state. He said when God created man, he created him spirit, soul, and body. But because of sin, now we flip the script. And so we don't even look at the three dynamics of a person. We typically would just look at their body and, sometimes you get to know someone. You get to know their intellect, their soul, their will, their emotions, the thing that make them click. But we very rarely dive into the ideas of spirit growth. What does that really mean outside of a theological perspective?
Because people are real good about, no, that's not true. People aren't real good about developing their bodies and taking care of themselves. We want to.
Yeah, we have
January 1.
We have great goals and great.
We were talking the other day about how hard it is to get back in once you fall off. But people,
I'm there right now.
But people want to focus in on that.
Yeah.
Or if it's advancing their education through a conference or college, but people think that spiritual growth, and you said it Sunday, happens almost through osmosis. They think going to church helps develop your spiritual growth. It absolutely does not.
No, it doesn't.
It's a small part.
Sure. And I think it's a significant part.
I don't want you to stop going to church.
Yeah, no, honestly, I think going to church does several things. It not just helps with your spiritual growth, though it's not the totality. I think it helps with the growth of the soul of a person to interact and relate with other people that you may not typically interact and relate with. But, definitely not, Who was it? Keith Green said going to church doesn't make you a believer as much any more than going to McDonald's to make you a Big Mac.
Yeah, but then you have people that really focus on the spiritual, but then they neglect, and this is kind of a big thing for me, I think it is for you too, we leave the mind out of that because Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I think when it comes to leadership and organizational strength, thought and spirituality are two beautiful things.
No, I think they have to work together. I think they have to work in concert. I think there's nothing more dangerous than a mindless believer. Yeah. And I also think that there's nothing more dangerous than a super thoughtful, mindful person who is spiritually dead. Yeah. I think both of them are going to end up in a ditch somewhere. I think you have to have the strength and the marriage of both. Oftentimes you've heard me say, whenever you look at, and I view Scripture this way sometimes. Maybe I shouldn't. I view God this way. Maybe I shouldn't, but I do. I think the study of Scripture and the study of God is not really, it should be more, instead of theology, it should be anthropology. In other words, the more that I study God, the more I study Scripture, the more I understand me, the more I understand the way I think, the more I understand the way I view things. Way too many read it just simply from a theological perspective to get principles instead of a person. They think truth is a construct of a bunch of ideas instead of no, truth was a person and is a person in Jesus Christ. And so whenever you leave the mind out of it, you can get spiritually weird.
Oh, true.
But when you even go into church and all you do are extremely cerebral, you can discount faith. You can discount the supernatural. You can discount other things. So I think what you said was 100% right, is there's got to be a marriage of both, where it is spirit and it is engaging the mind. You've heard me say before, you've said it as well, hey, don't leave your mind at the door when you come in. We want you to be thoughtful and thinking believers. And so for me, I just see it as, not just learning principles, but I learn who God is, but I also discover who I am along the way, or at least who God intended me to be along the way.
This is going off topic a little bit, but you just mentioned theology versus anthropology, with that. And, sometimes people get church hurt.
Yeah.
And maybe the observation is, okay, what can I learn from people instead of being affected by people?
Yes.
What can I learn about the situation of the human condition, even though I'm affected by it, maybe even offended by it, but it keeps me on a path of understanding, okay, this is what God has to deal with.
Right. Oh, man. Isn't that, good night, dude. Isn't that just so true? Isn't it funny how even people who don't believe in God want to blame God for stuff instead of humans taking responsibility? We have advocated responsibility so much, and I don't know if I was talking to you or somebody else about it. Other things that I have a challenge with in life and in thought, but it deals with this very subject, is, we look at, and you look at, like you mentioned, church hurt and people hurt in church, instead of, I have found that I'm an extremely generous person until somebody needs something. I'm an extremely thoughtful person until I'm around other people, and because other people bring out or have the capacity to bring out in me the things that are broken in me. Now, I can blame all that on God, or I actually can let it rest where it rests, which is on me. Yeah. And so often, because of the idea of sovereignty, we want to blame everything on God instead of take any personal responsibility for ourselves or for maybe what we have caused or what we have added to the challenges of others.
Yeah, and when you talk about that, it's we just threw out the term church hurt, but really that's people hurt.
It is.
And people hurt happens in organizational leadership, in the marketplace, and it just carries a different thing there.
Right.
So what we want to talk about today is how does a leader grow spiritually to the place where it helps them achieve success, reach goals, and then move towards happiness and fulfillment. And I think one of the areas, and so some of the things we talk about today, people aren't going to think about, well, that's not overtly spiritual. They're very spiritual.
Yeah.
And the first thing a leader can do is grow in gratitude.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
How's gratitude spiritual, Pastor? And how does it change a leader's perspective if you're growing in this area?
I think gratitude allows you to see the best in you as well as the best of others. I don't do this as much anymore because it goes back to that first exercise thing. I used to take what was gratitude walks, just go for a walk and be grateful and to be thankful and really think about it. I hadn't done this in a long time, but I did it the other day. I just walked around the church and I walked around everything that has been built and everything that's been done, and I went through, and I was intentionally being grateful for the stuff, but also for people, for our community. People may call, I wasn't praying. I was just literally being grateful because I heard someone say one time, it's hard to be depressed and grateful at the same time. It's hard to be discouraged and grateful at the same time. And so gratitude is the antithesis of depression and anxiety. Yeah. That you're walking around and you're just becoming extremely grateful for everything and everyone in your life. And sometimes that's a challenge. Other times it comes very, very easy. But I think it's a huge spiritual component. David said this. He said, bless the Lord, O my soul, and don't forget any of his benefits.
Come on. Yeah.
And so the benefits, the only way you remember benefits is you've got to intentionally engage gratitude to focus on those kind of benefits that are around. And sometimes the benefit is I survived something. Sometimes the benefit is something has come into my life that's been wonderful and great and amazing, a new relationship, whatever. And so I think that is huge when it comes to the arena of spiritual maturity and spiritual growth.
Well, I think two people that surround you notice a person who has gratitude and has that thankful spirit about them, and they carry that with them. The Word of God says, give thanks in all things.
All things, yeah.
In all things. And so I was reading something, though, and it was in regards to a scientific study, but it said if a person once a week takes time to write down 5 events for which they're thankful, it will lead that person to experience 25% more happiness than the general population.
Wow. That's huge.
That 25% more. And so I think that's a pretty healthy act.
And it's funny because you say 25% more and people would say, well, that's not that much, unless you were looking at your 401k.
Yeah.
If you were looking at your financial portfolio, anybody and everybody would want to gain 25% a year.
But what about your emotional portfolio?
But your emotional and your spiritual portfolio, if you could grow that capacity by 25%, just a couple of years, you'd be a giant in the arena of gratitude, right. Authentic gratitude, authentic gratefulness. Man, that's huge. That's a cool study.
Yeah, I thought that was good. Okay, here's the next area. A leader growing spiritually if they grow their humility.
Yeah.
How's this spiritual, and how does it move a leader towards success if they're growing in humility?
Well, one of my life verses is found in 1 Peter. It's also found in the book of James. Humble yourself under the hand of God, and in due season you'll be exalted. Okay? Humble yourself under the hand of God. Now, here's the thing. One of two things is going to humble you, life or you. Yeah. You have to make a choice to humble yourself. You know, you can't say, God humble me, God humble me, God humble me. You can pray till you pass out. It's not going to happen. You've got to make a decision to humble yourself. And so I think part of that is not just spiritual growth, but it's in every aspect of growth, whether it's industry, whether it's leadership, anywhere. You've got to be in places and you've got to be in rooms where you know I'm not the smartest guy in the room. And so humility allows you to celebrate where you are, celebrate what you know, but at the same time embrace what you don't and embrace where you're not at. And the loneliest time in someone's life is in that place where you're, man, this sounds terrible. You're leaving some relationships and some thoughts and some paradigms to shift into new, and it's uncomfortable. But if you'll be humble enough and patient enough, the new friends, new people, new things will come. I'll give you an example. When I rededicated my life to the Lord at 17 years old, I shared it a little bit this Sunday. I went from super popular in school to Siberia. And I mean, Fridays, I'm at home with my mom, my dad. I mean, it's not good. Well, I went through about 6 to 9 months with, man, it just was terrible. Yeah, I was just by myself a lot, okay? And I was okay with it. You know, I just took the idea me and Jesus are going to make it. But I would be lying to say that I didn't look around and envy what other people had at the time. I was like, man, I wish I could go back and maybe and do some of those things, but I knew I couldn't. I'm an all-in guy, man. If I'm going to do it, I'm all in. And
You're a people person, and when that's gone.
Yeah, when that's gone, that really stinks. And so, but as you know, I just went on my 40th trip in a row with a group of guys. All of those guys came into my life after that humbling transition, when I was willing to say bye to old influences, bye to old relationships, bye to old sources of knowledge and resources, and wait for the new. Literally, God brought 4 other guys into my life that, man, you know, we've been doing life together now for 40 years. You know, now it's 3 generations of us that go to the lake every year and hang out. I don't think that happens without humility. I don't think that happens without navigating the uncomfortableness of the in-between. And most people can't handle that. Most people, what they do is they run back to what was comfortable. They run back to acceptance, especially if you're a highly relational person like I am. You want to run back to what has always been comfortable instead of really trusting the journey of saying, you know what, no, better is going to come into my life. And I think what we devalue is proximity. And I think this is in so many arenas and so many areas. You've heard me say the relationships you start taking for granted, you stop receiving from. And the reason is because you stop growing from them. You're like, man, I just know them. Well, they may say one thing. They may say one word. They may demonstrate one thing that really just speaks to you in that moment. And so when we don't honor proximity, what we're saying is, I'm not humble. Yeah. But whenever I remain humble, then, man, proximity is something you long for, you look forward to, you glean from. And I think that requires humility.
I heard a guy say once, it hadn't been that long ago, that just in passing goes, and it went kind of like this. And and I'm a really humble person.
Yeah.
Just in the course, and I was thinking that when he said that, I was thinking, you don't have to announce humble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true.
People know.
Probably
you
not.
You don't tell me that. But this moves in when it comes to how it moves the needle for us as leaders. We move into the realm of servant leadership.
Okay.
And some guys struggle with servant leadership because they lack humility. But when you have humility, in especially in organizational leadership, to me, what that does is it moves the stars of your organization to the forefront.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, and lets them shine. And I think it also makes the leader's character and values the thing to emulate even before strategy.
Yeah, 100%. I think humility, I love Patrick Lencioni's definition of humility in the Ideal Team Player book. He says when you have someone who's humble, they understand their value and their worth that they bring to the table, and they do not try to be and bring what they do not have. The guy who's a self-made man, he's the answer to every question. That's not a. I see that person more as insecure than someone who's not humble. Mm-hmm. Instead of, man, just shine in your strengths. Because the thing is, I know where I'm strong, and I know where I'm not. And when I'm not, I've got to bring people around me. And my danger is that I can be informed about a lot of areas. That doesn't mean I'm strong in all of those areas. I can even have the right language of certain areas, but that's not my strength zone. Humility is knowing that this is my strength zone. This is my area. This is what I bring to the table that's the best. But then I got to bring other people around me to glean from them and celebrate them and champion them. And a humble person can champion somebody else. Where a prideful and arrogant person, they have a hard time championing others.
Okay, let's move to this one then. As a leader that is growing in body, mind, and spirit, and growing spiritually, this is an area that I think is paramount, and it's growing in optimism. Because if you dissect it, optimism is really a faith principle. What do you think about that? I read that.
I think optimism is a hope principle.
Okay.
I don't know that I think it's a faith principle. And the reason I say that is optimism is always, or hope is always in the future. It's always in front of you. It's those things you're hoping for, you're longing for, you're desiring for, you're pursuing after. And I think it takes a measure of optimism to see that. Personally, I struggle with optimism a lot because I see things the way I think they should be and they're not. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I could help them become that. And so I challenge thinking. It was like the stuff we were talking about earlier, the segregation of spirituality from all of life. That's been just a problem for me my entire life. And if I think about it a lot, or if I'm in a lot of conversations, and you and I have had this, we've both experienced this, okay, especially with business leaders, high capacity business leaders. You don't understand. I live in the real world.
Yeah.
I want to just cuss, I'm like, yeah, because I live in Fantasy Island, this is Disneyland, that I don't deal with the real world.
The most uninformed statement ever said is what you just said.
And so I really struggle with that because what they're telling me on themselves is what they're doing. They're telling me that their spirituality does not impact their world at all. But undoubtedly, mine over-influences my world.
Yeah.
Okay? And so I've just lived with that tension before I was in ministry, and working in chemical plants, I still struggled with that tension that all these guys went to church, but it wasn't impacting anything with life.
Well, that was the struggle with me even when I was looking at becoming a Christian and going all in, is I really had, and I guess a lot of people are like this, but I strongly looked at people to help me make my decision instead of what I knew was true about God.
Yeah.
But people demonstrate that.
Yeah.
So that's a hard tension.
It is.
About. But when you talked about optimism being hope, I get that. When I mention about optimism being akin towards faith, I see faith as something. Before I can have faith, I have to see something as I think it should be.
100%.
And so some people can't do that. They say, well, I have faith, but what do you have faith towards?
Right.
So even in business, I have a strategy. What am I believing towards? I think that separates a leader who's an unbeliever from a leader who's a believer in the strength of what they can believe towards and who else they bring into the picture to help them with that, which is the Lord.
Right.
But so it would help me. It would help me say this.
So I agree. I can get behind that. Then I understand what you're saying, because what strengthens our faith, or what helps form our faith, I said this a few weeks ago, is the pictures that we see.
Yeah.
Whether they're real, whether they're imaginary. So whenever you're casting a vision, what you're doing is you're painting a picture, and you're really trying to put faith and hope toward that picture. You know, we know that faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God, but we also know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so if you're able to paint the right picture, there's an optimism that begins to build, because there's a faith that begins to build for the vision that is in front of you. So that I can wholeheartely get behind, whether you're in business or whether you're not in business, because I think the difference between somebody who has a business that is vision focused, God focused, is not maybe not the nuances they would think. It's, what are we going to do that's going to cause the greater good for those who are working in our company, who are a part of our organization, and we're going to make the community better because we exist.
Okay, let me ask you this then. As a leader, which is more important when it comes to optimism? Is optimism more positive thinking, or is it positive doing as a leader?
As a leader,
Don't say both.
Well, it is both, but I think it is positive doing. I think one feeds the other one feeds the other. In other words, before you do a thing, you think a thing. And so as you begin to formulate your thoughts, it begins to motivate your actions. And so optimism first begins in the mind, it begins in the heart, and then you have to begin to walk that out and live that out.
Yeah, because it's the living it out that people are going, I love Pastor Don because he's an optimistic leader because of what I see.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things too that's positive about your leadership and your leadership style, is that it brings an optimistic outlook towards what can be accomplished and where we're going with the plan.
Sure.
But I've seen it all in the background of what you're thinking, but our team sees it in what you're doing, and that's kind of what birthed that. Okay, here's another one. Very spiritual growth.
I think though. Let's.
You going back to optimism?
I do. I want to dig in that moment, because I think leaders will discredit themselves, as I have done, because of the wrestling with the thinking before optimism is displayed.
Yeah. And they feel very pessimistic in their thinking.
Yeah, I think one of the most optimistic people you'll ever read about in the Bible is David. I mean, you look at the guy, let's go kill a giant with a slingshot and a rock. But have you ever read the Psalms?
Yeah.
They can be pretty depressing. God, where are you? Why have you abandoned me? How long will my enemies triumph over me? All of these things. And then it seems like midway through every psalm, there's this switch that, God, there's none like you. God, you're bad all by yourself. I'm going to rise from these ashes. All this, paraphrase versions I'm giving. I think sometimes leaders, because they will discredit their own optimism because they know their own wrestling of thought.
Yeah.
That they wrestle with thoughts to get there. Mm-hmm. And people see them as, man, they're this optimistic, go-getting type leader. But you have to have grace for yourself to know that, man, I wrestled with it to get there.
Yeah. I don't know if this is even accurate. I'm just going to throw it out there. But sometimes optimism is almost like lying to yourself. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
You're being optimism because you know there's truth. You know it can be done, but you're wondering, how in the heck?
I think what you're doing, though, is I don't know that it's lying to yourself. I think it goes back to what we said a moment ago. I have more faith in the picture I see than the present moment I'm living in.
Yeah, or my own belief in my ability to execute it.
Or my ability.
Yeah. All right. Growing your generosity. Enormous spiritual growth piece.
Yes.
Because a lot of people, even leaders, lead from a place of lack in their thinking, or maybe what they think has been dealt to them, instead of what the truth is about who God is to them. And maybe that's the key. Who God is to you will decide how generous you can become.
Yes.
I don't know. Talk about generosity and growth.
Well, I got a whole message I just did on this I'm going to do later. I've never preached it to the church. And so you and I
This is one of our core values.
You and I have talked about that I will be sharing. One, I think generosity, immediately we think of generosity, we think of money. Mm-hmm. I think that's so narrow-minded. I think currency is the last avenue of generosity. Generosity, absolutely. What you just said a moment ago, is a heart posture first. It's your view of God. And if God owns it all and God has a supply of it all, it's like this. I can give mercy because I know he's rich in mercy. I can give grace because I know he's rich in grace. I can be kind and nice to others because I know he's been kind and nice to me. If I have it goes back to that anthropology versus theology thing. Mm-hmm. When it's just theology, I have received mercy. When it's anthropology, I understand I am in need of mercy, but I'm also, now I get to distribute mercy. I get to be generous with mercy. I get to be generous with kindness. And, what do you do if someone takes advantage of that? You continue to be generous, because how many times have I been taking advantage of his generosity and his mercy? And so I think that when we look at generosity, it's not just in finances. You look at the guy with the talents. If you go to that, you got the 5, the 2, the 1. The guy with the 5 doubled it, but he had to risk what he had. The guy with 2, he doubled it, but he had to risk what he had. The guy with 1, he buried it. Why? He wasn't willing to risk. He wasn't willing to take responsibility to risk what he had. Generosity requires risk.
Oh, true.
At every level.
Yeah.
If I'm kind, I'm risking someone not to be kind to me. If I'm merciful, I'm risking not to be merciful. If I give the guy up here who says he's hungry, and I give him $10 that he can go over to one of the local fast food places and get some food, I'm risking that he may not get food. But you know what? I'm still going to be generous because he's been generous to me. So my proportion of generosity is not what I have. My proportion of generosity is what I have received. It's like this. I've done this here. And it's funny because you always, whenever you're getting ready, you always get a pushback. And this is in the arena of finances and money. Anytime the church has gotten ready to build or get out of debt or do whatever, I've always increased giving and missions. That is so counterculture, okay? Yeah. But it's the law of reciprocity when it comes to Scripture. Give, and it will give them back to you. Press down, shake together, run over. give, and I will open the windows of heaven, and I will pour blessing out upon you. It's all through what we say we believe. So back in the day, when we got ready to pay off this property down here, the first thing I did was increase our missions giving. Everybody in the room, you don't understand, we're on a goal. We have a drive. We got an objective. We're going to get out of debt. We're going to go pay off that property. I said, I know. We need God to help us, so let's be generous. Let's give. So we increase missions. We got ready to build phase 1 down here. I gave every missionary a raise, and we increased the missions that we gave. When we got ready to do phase 2 down here, exact same thing. Every time I get pushback. Every time. So what I know is we're about to look at building again. I'm going to increase missions again. It's going to be a fight. I know it's going to be a fight. But you know what? It has worked for me my entire life. And so I just can't give up on generosity now just because the numbers are bigger.
Okay, so let's say in a business organization, one of our business leaders that's listening today, how does that apply to their secular business?
Every way.
Secular business.
Yeah. It applies it in every shape, form, or fashion.
If you want to go the next level and Santos, you had her on here.
Yeah.
And let's say if excellence wants to go to the next level, how does generosity play there, hypothetically, or with Josh, or just any of our business?
There's a book out, Leaders Eat Last. Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek in chapter 2 or 3 tells the story of a company that was in a downturn. Okay, and by everyone's estimation, you should start doing layoffs. Instead, the owner of the company went to everybody who had vacation, and he said, "Would you be willing to margin some of your vacation so we can get through this downturn?" The company didn't hand out dividends. The owner of the company didn't take bonuses for a time and a season. What was he doing? He was practicing generosity. It took about 18 months, I think, if I remember the story well in the book. But it took about 18 months of that company being generous, the leadership being generous to their employees, to their people. And when they did, when they came out of that, they didn't lose one employee. And then when the dividends started rolling back in, they were postured to begin to expand exponentially. Typically what happens in generosity, we're generous when we're like too many people are like the government. We're generous with other people's money. Instead of saying, you know what, no, I'm going to hold. No, I'm going to wait. No, I'm going to pause. Because I would rather be generous to others that are around us so we make it through this difficult season and then we can move forward. Now, there are times it requires cuts. I'm not saying it, one size fits all. There are times that hard, fast decisions have to be made. But I think you have to exhaust generosity, And you speak of the two people you just mentioned. I know, there are things I know that they could have done, but for the well-being of their organizations, they didn't. Yeah. For the well-being of their organizations, they prioritized others. They put others first because the picture that they had painted in front of them knew I've got to have people around me to get there. So my best asset is not my dollars, it's my people.
Yeah, and both of those people are two very generous individuals, but not even in regards to finances.
Just life experience.
Giving themselves away.
Yeah.
With people, and so I think that is so highly spiritual, and people don't think about that. But the next one, this last one, and this is something I'm might be my favorite topic we're going to talk about, is to grow spiritually would mean to grow your expectations. Grow expectation. And when I think of this, I think of it in how we program ourselves towards outcomes. Okay. That's an expectation. My expectation is this is going to happen. Yeah. But how is this a spiritual growth necessity for a leader who wants to not just see positive growth in their business environment, but also personally and in their employees? Expectation.
Now this, I think, does lend itself more to faith than hope. Mm-hmm. Okay. What is it you inspect, what you expect? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes self-awareness is personal inspection. Mm-hmm. And so if you have expectations for yourself, what are you inspecting about yourself? Let's go back to that body strength thing that I've put off for a little bit now. You know, that my 1 week off is now turned into 2 weeks off. You know, if I expect to get stronger, I have to do some internal inspection and say, I got to get back in the gym. I got to get up. I got to make some commitments. I think it's that way in every aspect of life, that whatever you're expecting, if I'm expecting this outcome, then what am I doing and what am I putting around to see that outcome come to pass? Okay? I do think that we overestimate some things and we underestimate other things. In other words, we overestimate events and we underestimate process. And some expectations are only realized as we're just faithful to the process, faithful to the journey. You know, I was talking to a guy the other day. He was talking about his message he preached. He goes, I'm going to see if that did any good. And I looked at him and said, it didn't. And he's like, you didn't even listen to it. I said, I know, but you're overestimating one sermon.
Wow.
It's not going to do that good. I said, my question is what are you following that up with? Not just on the platform. What are you following it up with in every aspect that's going to drive that change to get you where you want to go?
Okay, because I wrote down in our notes here that expectation is the doorway of imagination.
Yes.
And when you say imagination and spirituality, all of a sudden now I'm New Age. You know, no, I know I'm not, but people.
Yeah.
Anytime you start talking about imagination and Christianity, people don't know how to process that.
I think the imagination is the creative seed of God to
Yes.
begin to do some cool stuff.
Because we're created in His image.
Yeah.
So let's go with that, because look, Steve Jobs was not a believer.
Right.
He leaned, I think, Buddhism.
Yeah.
And, but he was outrageously creative. Why? Because he was created in the image of God. But once you find the truth of Jesus Christ, then that imagination is channeled towards kingdom.
Yeah.
But expectation, how do you have expectation towards something you haven't imagined first?
Yeah. I think
what you just said about one sermon, but everything else around us is the imagination.
It is. And it has to be. I think men struggle with so many imagined things because they've not yet allowed God to redeem their imagination. And so men's creativity begins to die because they've not stirred the imagination. They've not allowed God to redeem their imagination. And I was reading a study the other day, and I'm going to use this in a message in a few months when we get to the Family Fight series. But it said this. It said that every child is born at a genius level. And their genius begins to diminish by the time they get about 12 years old. And so what is it about a child that causes their genius to diminish? We start squelching imagination.
Yeah.
Children have, and Jesus said this, he said, unless you come to me as a little child. And we look at it just in the arena of faith. But what if you looked at it in the arena of imagination and really dreaming with God, dreaming that the impossible is possible? Did God create furniture? No. God created trees, but He gave man imagination. And when man began to imagine, I'm sick and tired of sitting on a rock, they took the 4 elements that God gave them, and through imagination began to create furniture that we get to enjoy and sit on today.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
So many times I think we squelch imagination because when someone's, I mean, you've heard this, he's just a dreamer.
Yeah.
As if that's a negative thing. Why is that a negative thing instead of the apex of faith?
Okay, well,
And you have an entire Bible of people who are led by dreams and imagination. I'm going to take Abraham. I'm going to go to a land you've never been before. The entrepreneur. And entrepreneurs, if they don't have an imagination, they're DOA. I'm telling you, they're dead on arrival as an entrepreneur, because what gives you the courage to sell yourself and to sell your idea and to sell your dream and to sell your concept of a business is your imagination. You can see it, you can walk into it, you can taste it before anybody else can.
some people penalize themselves by saying, I'm not creative. And, but everybody is creative. If you've ever said,
Sure.
you know what, this chair would look better in this wall against this wall, then you've just imagined.
Yes.
If you want, man, I think I'm going to plant blue flowers there instead of these yellow ones. That you've just imagined. You
Yeah.
see something that wasn't. And so that's the level. I think cultivating imagination happens when you start hanging out with creative people. So
Yes.
my kids, for instance, my oldest daughter, Tori, is just outrageously creative, just naturally creative.
Yeah.
Well, sibling rivalry, I don't know anything about that because I'm an only child. All right. But with Brianna and Kayla, they're always looking up to their big sister. But Brianna, I don't know, she might disagree with this, but I observed it as, really envied the creativity. Well, that's when Pinterest came along.
Yeah.
And Brianna would dive into Pinterest and come up with stuff and create and do it until it got in her. Now Brianna is extremely creative,
Yeah.
even without the resources, because she cultivated imagination. Don't tell me you're not creative, because God's creative.
And I think the word you just used is probably the apex of everything we're talking about today is when it comes to spiritual growth, when it comes to whatever, what are you willing to cultivate?
Yeah.
Do you want to cultivate your imagination? Do you want to cultivate generosity? Do you want to cultivate optimism? Are you willing to cultivate these characteristics, these concepts, or do we want to excuse them? And trust me, life wants to erode all of those things, whether it's confidence, creativity, optimism, generosity, but you got to be willing to go back and cultivate it.
So creativity and imagination, once you have that, then you can set an expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the danger of not having God involved in everything. If you're this could be a really deep subject to go into, and I'm not going to go into all of it. But if you live in a universalist society that basically says everything that was created out of nothing until nothing decided to do something, and then why did nothing decide to do something, and then that something that was created got it right at the very first time they ever tried it, and out of that 2 + 2 always equals 4, then what you're saying is you're a product of your experiences and you're a product of math. And way too often people's faith is that way.
Yeah, wow.
Instead of embracing a God that was imaginative, that everything that you see, everything that, I just came back from the lake. Before then, I was in Africa. Before then, I was in Florida. Or after that, I was in Florida. And you look at all of creation, you have to understand creation came from an imaginative God. Yeah. And we were created in his image, imagination, and likeness. So we were created to create.
Absolutely.
We were created to imagine. And so that we're not a byproduct of just 2 + 2 = 4. We're not a byproduct of just this and this creates this. No, we're a byproduct of imagination, and what we're going to produce is going to be produced out of our imagination.
And it's happening in record time, over and over, and accelerating, and it's all because man was created in the image of a creative God.
Yeah.
And so setting our expectations based upon who we know God to be in our life and what he's speaking into us, man, I think that moves the needle across the board in how we affect people and what the lasting impact our business organization can have based on what we dream with God.
Yeah.
You know, good stuff, Pastor.
I like it. And so I think we've given people a whole lot to think about, though, in this one episode, because we kind of like gone shh. But I do think that it's dangerous, especially for believers in Christ, to limit what their ideas of spirituality and spiritual impact can be, instead of saying, you know what, I serve an amazing God who's creative. He wants to do some cool things in my life, through my life, and in others. And I think if we do that, you'll not just grow, but you'll see everything around you grow and flourish.
Well, I think one of the things that would really help us all today as well is if my favorite chapter in the Bible, one of them, is 2 Peter chapter 1. And in it, it gives these 8 virtues that if you cultivate and you grow in them, it affects your influence across the board.
Yeah.
And they're all highly practical, but they're also highly spiritual. And I think that's what we need to learn how to marry and not be afraid of. That practical, supernatural, practical spirituality is really what moves things forward.
Absolutely. So, hey guys, hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Man, be looking for the next installment of Beyond the Table. I know today we gave it a lot to think about. You'll have to go back and watch it a few times, but it'll be worth a watch. We'll talk to you soon.